Hey, morning everyone. Can you hear me? Yep, I can, yeah. Morning everyone, welcome to the seminar. I hope everybody's got somewhere to sit. We put a couple of emergency benches there. So welcome to the BCO launch of the research on circular economy. I'm Debbie Hobbs. I'm on the BCO ESG committee. I'm also, for my sins, helping chair the ESG section of the new fit-out guide we are currently writing. And obviously we're going to merge this research into it. I've worked in the industry about 34 years, I hate to say now, always in sustainability. I did physics by degree and then chartered with SIBSE, but my whole career has been about sustainability and also trying to make buildings work properly and be very sustainable. So I've seen the industry client side 3 times, consultant side a couple of times at Ecom and Environ, contractor at ISG, and now I'm working full-time for CBRE, seconded to a tenant called S&P Global. So unfortunately today, Laura from JLL hasn't been able to make it, but I'll sort of also look at the tenant side as well and the operational side. We've got a really good panel lined up for you and some really interesting content, so I'm not going to speak for very long. I'm hoping the slides are going to advance if I press the right button. She says. This one?
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Here's the agenda. So this is me doing a welcome. Then Anna and Kate are going to present the research and what's been found. And then we've got a panel with Nick Woodmore, who I was working with at ISG previously, now at Overbury, Juliana Wren from TP Bennett, and also then Anna's going to join us to represent the research side. So I think that's going to be a really good panel. So get your questions ready. And just to kick off with something a little bit controversial, for me, I think the circular economy is one of the newer ideas in sustainability. And I only say that because I've been working on net zero carbon and energy efficiency for about 34 years. And circular economy only came into my head probably 12 years ago-ish. We always talked about waste, but we never talked about circular economy. And in the wider industry, outside the sustainability world, I think people are really confused about what it is. I was saying this to Anna earlier. And although we all work in it, we start defining it, we start talking about it, everybody outside our little sphere of knowledge then says, what is it? And some of the key questions coming up to me are, how do I measure it? How do I show I'm really good at it? What's it going to cost me? And what are the risks? So I'm going to set that up for the panel. I think we're going to have a lot of questions around that. And without further ado, I'm going to go forward. These are our speakers, sorry, and I'll introduce them more later. But as I say, Nick is working in the sustainability design side at Overbury, trying to make all the Overbury design sustainable. Anna's just authored the report, and Juliana is working at TP Bennett and has a lot to work on circular economy. So they will join me in the panel after the presentation. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to 80 Charlotte Street. We're actually going to use Mentimeter throughout the presentation today to complete polls. So if I can invite you to follow the link, mentimeter.com, and add it in the code. Or I can pop this up. If you're close enough, you may be able to scan the QR code. And it should pop up. And then once people vote, we should have real-time results popping up on the screen, hopefully. Here we go. Okay, so lots of consultants, designers, contractors, developers. Lots of bubbles there. And there's probably a few more votes coming through. The next slide and the next question on the poll we have is, how would you consider your knowledge of circular economy principles? So fundamental, novice, or expert? So more novices than people with basic knowledge, and a few experts. Maybe you're involved in the Q&A, unless they're in the panel. Is it the 4 on the panel? Fab. And finally, the last question before we get actually into the presentation at the moment is, in your day-to-day role, do you consider circular economy principles? Yes, that's positive. Okay, occasionally, and yes, kind of matched. I think that's everyone nearly voted, 62 people. Okay, so positive, I guess, that more people say yes than no. We'll jump into kind of the content of the presentation now. So traditionally, standard practice in the office development involves a linear approach. And a linear economy follows the take, make, dispose model, where raw materials are taken from the earth, manufactured into products, and then disposed of by consumers. And this creates various levels of waste. At best, we may recycle, which also isn't circular. So the circular economy provides a framework for an economy that creates maximum value for resources, supports the circulation of materials, and regenerates nature. So this diagram, some of you may have seen it before, is produced by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it highlights that the circular economy involves various flows of material. It's maybe a lot to take in if you haven't seen it before, but on the left-hand side, you have the biological cycle, where nutrients from biodegradable materials are returned to the earth to regenerate nature. And on the right-hand side, you have the technical cycle, where products and materials are kept in circulation through processes such as recycling, remanufacture, and refurbishment and reuse. So our research, in partnership with the BCO, aim to raise awareness of the opportunity for circularity in office new build, refurbishment and fit out of offices, and showcase existing guidance. We wanted to provide an understanding of the key challenges in developing circular economy principles in new build and fit out of offices. And we wanted to provide recommendations and solutions for stakeholders along the value chain to support a shift to more sustainable and circular approaches. And our research involved undertaking a literature review of guidance, policy documents and legislation. And we also conducted interviews with industry experts to find out their opinion and experience with circular economy principles. So our research highlighted that first and foremost, to embed circular economy principles, we should eliminate waste and pollution by keeping assets in use that are already around us. We should also circulate materials, keeping assets in use, ensuring what is designed will keep will retain its maximum value. And this can be done through, for example, flexibility, so designing spaces for different uses, through designing for disassembly, so different aspects of buildings can be reused at the end of their design life, and also potentially considering products as a service, so products can be leased rather than purchased, therefore in the long term eliminating waste. And therefore this should all lead into regenerating natural systems, and we can support business model change by procuring products that support natural systems such as bio-based materials. So the key drivers of change we identified from our research, and I'll just talk a little around them. So the environmental benefits of embedding circular economy principles, these are wide-ranging from reduced embodied carbon, reduced extraction of raw materials, reduced construction waste. Also, industry shocks such as the pandemic have influenced the way that we interact with offices, and there have been changes in the lease lengths. We've noticed that certain occupiers are taking on to give a greater level of flexibility. Policy drivers and regulatory requirements and reporting. So we've noticed that certain cities and local authorities are embedding circular economy principles, for example, in their planning guidance and legislation in London, Glasgow and the West Midlands. Vision and value alignment. So circular economy principles and organisation. So this is important to embed activities in their day-to-day role. And economic drivers. So a study by the Office of National Statistics highlighted that currently construction materials are 46% higher than they were in January 2020. So this really highlights the opportunity for reuse and the cost saving in doing so. So we're going to head into another poll now. If you go and answer this question, what do you think are the biggest challenges around embedding circular economy principles? They should pop up. 2 from clients, clients buy-in, clients don't ask, confidence. new design trends, costs, supply chain understanding, expense, knowledge, cost, yeah. Cost is coming up a lot. Education is an important one. Perceived lack of, yeah, cost is overtaking them all. Perceived lack of quality from use, that's an interesting one that maybe the panel can discuss. Explaining the benefit to the clients. Warranties, insurance, that's something we encompass that also maybe, Debbie, we can talk through on the panel. Taking a long-term view, ignorance, knowledge, marketability to tenants. There are loads here, thanks so much. Attitude, vested interest, holistic thinking, lack of clear processes. Yeah, but basically from that we've seen that cost is probably the biggest challenge. So we can talk around that with reference to the case studies that are included in our report. And now we'll flip that and say, we'll ask you, what do you think are the biggest opportunities, or where do you think the biggest opportunity lies around embedding circular economy principles? Saving cost, yeah. Environmental benefits, tax, carbon saving, environmental, saving the environment. Yeah, reduce carbon emissions, environmental. So maybe on the whole, we understand the benefits of doing so, but we maybe need a little more knowledge sharing and systemic change to enable our supply chains to allow to do this. So if I think maybe all of them will come through, I'll hand over to Anna, who will with the rest of the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see a packed space in Europe. I'm joined Arab about a year ago. Know some of you, I think, from my previous role at UK Green Building Council, where I did a lot around circular economy. But it's been really nice to work on this project and I suppose speak to many of you who are here today through the process. But I think we all know the why, as Kate has just mentioned, and I think we know why we need to be adopting circular principles. Kate has talked about embodied carbon, so the climate emergency being a big agenda item for us to address. But I think we now need to get on with the applying it and putting it into practice. So we looked at some of the associated, and we've seen cost being a big one. We see that there's some systemic challenges associated with a lack of policy, and we all know that that's very slow to come around with the regulations. We're actually seeing, as Kate has mentioned, cities actually taking much more of a lead, setting out policy requirements and really putting those into practice. And I think it's skilling people quite quickly in that space. Another area that I think needs addressing is the I suppose the whole concept of a circular economy, which is actually rethinking our current economic system. We, as Kate says, we operate where we extract, make and dispose. And actually, I think many of our business models, we saw many of us representing lots of different sectors, need to maybe rethink what our offer is that are the three principles of a circular economy. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, but currently is maybe a bit of a challenge to really accelerating that change that we need to see. The practical challenges, we've probably seen a lot of those already, and maybe you know those through the application of looking at circular economy in your day-to-day work. Attitudes and perceptions. We, through our research, we've heard a lot about tenants continually having a perception of having new, shiny materials when they go into a space. There's an expectation that there's a Cat fit out, they can see everything looking brand new. And maybe there's some perceptions that need to change. I'm talking to some of the letting agents, for example. They're starting to see that there's a huge opportunity there to be able to educate and talk to tenants about actually, do we need to have this shiny new office? Business case, I think it's always sometimes a bit of a challenge having access to some of that data and being a case where there are cost savings. We've been working on projects where, for example, steel reuse has been much more cost effective than procuring brand new steel. So there's already data and case studies that are out there that you can refer to. Timing and risk, quite often there'll be circular economy, some initiatives might come in a bit too late, or they need to be properly programmed in, and often they're not. And I think some of the learning will come out in the discussion later, that for some case studies that we looked at, that was imperative to the success of applying circular economy. So it's risk, warranty, standards, always comes up. I know time and time again on projects that there'll be contractors maybe, or clients or occupiers don't want to take on the risk of specifying reuse materials. We need to move on from that. There's a lot of data information out there that goes to show there actually isn't the liability associated with this. Insurers quite often will bring up that there's a challenge around this, but actually there isn't, and we need to really start to look at some existing case studies of where that's been dealt with. Cat A strip outs, I think that's probably the biggest contributor to embodied carbon in the fit out sector. Maybe we need to have a kind of quite focused discussion on what we think around Cat A strip outs, and also putting in Cat A. How can we overcome the huge amount of wastes and embodied carbon associated with Cat A strip out? Specifications, it's crucial that procurement teams, designers, that we're specifying in the right way. Again, I'm only at a recent reuse of steel event. It's really important that we don't just specify a particular type of, for example, steel, that we also enable reuse steel to be built into that. So specification is important. Again, happy we should talk about that during the discussion. Reusing materials, we should continually be reusing it. Product suppliers should be taking back products so that we continually keep them in flow, and sharing that construction material data for things like material passports, and procurement, getting that right, and ensuring that the procurement process is super clear. Anyway, not wanting to spend too long, I'll probably just give a few highlights on each of the case studies that we addressed in the report. And I think in the discussion we'll go into a bit more detail with Juliana and Nick, and probably Debbie as well. But the ANZ Bank, a huge opportunity to work collaboratively with the client there. The client was really on board, and the team at TP Bennett who led that ensured that all of the furniture as part of the fit out was reused. I think 80% of the furniture there was reused, creating huge embodied carbon savings. The Entopia building, I know there's a huge amount happening now around spreading the good news story around that, and the huge savings, and working again closely with Cambridge University, I think it was, who were the client, and looking at reusing the raised access flooring, and overcoming some obstacles around adhesives and various challenges. And there's some really good lessons learned associated with that project. 80 Charlotte Street, we're here. There's huge amounts of embodied carbon savings that were considered as part of the project, designing out waste, looking at taking out materials from ceilings. I think Steve here at the back, representing, will be happy, I'm sure, just to talk to you about some of the amounts of data. Calculations were done to address that, and we've included some of the data in the report, and what we've also will be doing is sharing that data through our Circular Buildings Toolkit, which is a freely available toolkit for project teams to apply circular economy through the project lifecycle stages. It's freely available. It was developed with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so you should be able to see that shortly on that toolkit. And then Park 2020, I've taken one from outside UK, only because it's interesting. It's a really interesting, I can shout, investor story. So the investor in the Netherlands has really gone to town with circular economy principles, from everything to do with products as a service, looking at lighting and lifts, looking at healthy materials, cradle to cradle certification. They also benefited from very fast occupancy rates and high 95%, I think, user satisfaction. And also, I think at a time when the market was quite difficult and volatile, they were able to attract higher rental yields as well for their office space. I'll go through these quickly because I think time's a bit tight. But the recommendations in the report, and you'll see for yourself, and you can go through them, but the way that we addressed the recommendations or the solutions was through each of the, I suppose, life cycle stages. So at strategy stage, we're saying setting a clear direction so that principles can be embedded in the design. Looking at site appraisals, creating new buildings may be controversial, but I think we should be retrofitting first and foremost, especially around embodied carbon being such a big contributor towards the built environment's carbon emissions. Setting KPIs, again, there's lots of guidance and reference in the research document that sets direct order some ways. Design, consider that can be that reused, that have been used through demolition audits. Sorry, it's really disconcerting. Through pre-demolition audits, being able to identify where materials can be bought in and reused. Looking at design, standardized design formats. Don't design in a bespoke way so that those elements can be used over and over again. And also looking at reversible fixing. So everything that in your project should be able to be demountable and then have an onward life as well. And then having touch along the process. So having some of those workshops with the design teams, with the whole project team, to be able to identify, are we on track to applying circular economy principles? Procurement. Again, I think I've mentioned this, but having a procurement team that are able to be maybe quite ambitious, have discussions with your product suppliers about whether their products as a service is an opportunity, whether they will take back products. We need a linear economy of taking and extracting and then landfilling or incinerating, and even moving away from recycling. Material passports, I think, is maybe a fairly new. Need to be complicated. It's just about understanding what materials have you got, what material bank have you got there in your building, how can you extract it when it's finished and then send it back on again out into for reuse. Construction sector, on board as early as possible. Easier said than done, I think, sometimes, but actually we'll hear from some of the case studies that by having that early engagement, that was able to enable more circular principles to be applied. Cate strip outs, I think, could be avoided. We've heard from some ideas around having virtual reality, or even just having one space that's fitted out so that tenants can get an idea of what it will look at without having the material installed and then extracted. I think there's many stories of skips outside offices with brand new materials that haven't been used. And then letting. So we had a really interesting conversation with Laura from JLL, where they're finding that talking to tenants, explaining to tenants what the opportunities are for circular economy is really been positive. I think if more tenants can start to ask questions, letting agents can highlight what the opportunities are, is a useful discussion. We also talked about dilapidation. So at the end of tenancy, how can we set up a wider system so that tenants coming into spaces are able to be signposted to spaces that are enabling reuse and not having to take out some of that. In summary, there's many change drivers of change, and I think we've started to see some changes in lease lengths, sustainability, in environmental, social, and governance issues. I think we found from the research, although we dealt with new build and fit out refurbishment, we see fit out as a contributor, massive opportunity for embedding circular economy, and they'll meet. So we've highlighted some here on carbon, waste generation, material extraction, and also associated with that extraction species decline, which is a massive agenda item today for us. And then finally, we all know this, but collaboration, sharing that knowledge. And there's many platforms, UK Green Building Council, BITC, ourselves, we're all creating those platforms to share that information. So the more that can be spread, the more we can all learn. And we're going to do one last poll in case you've might have drifted off. which is, would you consider circular economy principles more in the future?
Nobody's going to say no.
Maybe they should kind of discussion about what your answer is, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it would be great to get some of your perspectives during the discussion as well. So yeah, get your questions ready and I'll hand over to Debbie. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. That was brilliant. So for the panellists to come and join me, I'm just going to add a bit to the controversial nature of what Anna said. I love being controversial. Yeah, in the future, can we have new buildings really? If we want to minimise embodied carbon, can we keep extracting material? And I hate to say that for all the people involved in new buildings. Is this going to work as well? Oh, okay. I can stand around. I like doing this. Can we really afford to keep having new buildings? And I know that sits badly with developers, it sits badly with designers, but we need to design everything for deconstruction and reconstruction. I was taught that by Pete Kelly at ISG. I'm not sure he's made it today, but the buildings of the future are the ones that reuse materials, minimise embodied carbon, and allow us to live on the planet. And it just reminded me of my early days. There was a guy called Ernst Schumacher who wrote a book called Small is Beautiful. I did it in my A-level physics nearly 40 years ago. And it made me think, we have a finite planet. And to add to the controversy, I heard somebody on the radio this week from phone-in for Radio 5 Live. And they said, what's all this talk of growth in the economy? We can't grow. We can't always grow. That growth is not good because it's destroying the planet. So I'm going to leave it there. And we're going to go over to the panel. So I'm going to introduce people with my very, very rough notes. So Nick, as I've said before, worked with me when I was ISG. I know he's worked heavily on one of these projects here, based in Cambridge, which I'm probably not allowed to name yet, even so, but hey-ho. He's worked in sustainability for over 10 years. He's worked for 2 consulting companies and 8 years in a contractor. He's always been involved in boundary pushing projects, and I know that from ISG, that he always tried to push the boundary. He was involved in the largest Enefit refurbishment in the UK, which from a operational carbon point of view is definitely where we've got to go to. And then we've got Juliana Wren from TP Bennett, who is bringing the designer and architect side view to the whole process. She's experienced in sustainable design. She's been working on architecture and interiors over the last decades, and she's led many projects from the conception right the way through to delivery in a holistic approach, which I think is, again, a bit key here, that we don't all work in silos. And obviously Anna, who you've already met and has introduced herself. So I'm going to sit down. We've got another microphone as well. Anna, you have this one. There we go. You have that one, and I have this one. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions to the panel, and then I'm going to ask for the audience. So please start getting your questions ready. My first one to the panel is really, what do you think current clients' appetite is for circular economy? And although we've talked about it already, from your point of view, what are the main barriers and what are the main opportunities? Let's go with barriers first. Over to you, Nick.
Well, I think clients are very interested in it, especially with its links to net zero carbon, but only in a very broad, nebulous sense. I don't know if other people have found this. People love the idea of it, think it sounds great, and then when you start working through the actual principles on a project, they tend to get quite scared. So one of my responses earlier was around confidence. So there's issues with warranty. There's this belief that it's like this nirvana thing that solves all problems. As soon as you've got a warranty, you don't have to worry about a product ever again. But actually, it only covers the product if it fails in a very specific way, and it's only the parts that are covered. No liability outside of that, from what we've found. So you've got to re-educate what's most important, and people need to put their sort of professional stamp on a product to give the client confidence. And supply is also an issue, making sure that your project aligns exactly with the donor. If 2 programs go out of sync, you've got storage issues. So there's a lot of trains in flight that make it difficult to find those products exactly when you need them for the right price, which then plays back to the client, not necessarily having confidence to go forward, even though they're very keen on the idea.
Brilliant, thank you. Juliana?
I'd agree with Nick. Like our clients are really, really interested. Most of them, because of the requirement of reducing embodied carbon. So we bring circular economy as one of the solutions to reducing embodied carbon. Some of them because they have their own sustainability agenda, or because they are required to do that by their investors. So it comes from there as well. So more and more investors are requiring a reduction in embodied carbon. So then circular economy comes into play. Yeah.
Anna, do you want to add anything
Probably
to what you've already
heard
said?
enough from me. I suppose just one quick point I would say is I echo that the clients are asking for it, but then I think it's also what does that mean? A circular economy, how do we then apply that? What does it look like? And for every project it will be a different outcome, and I suppose it's navigating through all of those solutions and making them a reality.
Thank you, thanks. I've got two more quick questions, then we'll go over to the audience. The next one is about measurement, and the final one about cost. So the next question is, how do you measure the circular economy? I noticed Anna mentioned materials passports. And just as a quick poll, before Anna said it, how many people had heard of a materials passport? Can you put your hands up? Ah, that's good. We've got a really informed audience, because most people I talked to would not have heard of it. I first heard of it on a tender in Amsterdam. No, it wasn't Rotterdam, yeah, where they were trying to bring it in. But there's a lot of people in the wider industry that, don't know what a materials passport is. So I don't know who wants to start first. How do we go about measuring it? Juliana?
Yeah, I think one way is exactly with embodied carbon calculations. We did in our project case study in the report, we did calculate embodied carbon for every little part of the project. Obviously, in our project, the key highlight was furniture. We did reuse nearly 70%. We had a target of 70%, and I think we managed to achieve around 66%, and that's because we had that as basically a requirement from the client from the very start. So we we didn't address that like in the middle of the project. It was something from the start. Another measurement we did was diversion from landfill. So we calculated all the bits and pieces of the furniture we used that were not sent to landfill because they were reused in the refurbished furniture. So that's kind of the two measures that we used in the project.
I think it comes back to useful data. Are we just talking about carbon, or is it simpler than that? Could it be the mass of materials that go into the building, the percentage of new versus reused? I think we need those like basic building blocks of data to understand exactly what's gone in, get the wastage rates, and then you can look at circular economy, embodied carbon. But you need that sort of fine granular detail first, which we don't have, and it gets in the way.
And I like the idea of keeping it simple. I think we just need a definition in the industry that we can all work towards. Is it percentage by weight, percentage by embodied carbon? We're still trying to define net zero. So what is net zero carbon? And we've been working on that for 35 years that I remember. So we've got to get some simple metrics to measure these things. And then I think if clients have a way of showing how good they are on them, then they're more inclined to do it. I was intrigued when I went to talk to the tenant I'm working for now, S&P, and the CBRE team, and I said, do you reuse materials? Yeah, they said, we're doing it all the time because supply chains are disrupted, we can't get them in, costs have gone up, but they're not calling it circular economy, they're doing it for other reasons, so it's happening, but I think people don't realise they're already doing parts of it. Anna, did you want to ask?
I was just going to say, I think many of us probably recognise some of those measurements around recycled content or recycling, which I think ideally we would move that agenda on and look at the amount that is reusable or has been reused, and starting to measure those types calculations, I would say.
And so the last one before I open it up for me is the cost issue. So I know on the Utopia building, for instance, there was lots of reuse of materials, but that meant getting somebody to dismantle some lighting very, very carefully, store it, send it back to the manufacturer, re-warranty it, keep it for when it could be reinstalled, and all that has an additional cost. And similarly with the steel that was reused, it had to be dismantled, redesigned in some way, recut slightly, brought back to site. So what about the cost? Does it cost more? Are there cost savings? What's your experience? Go on, Nick.
Well, it doesn't necessarily cost more. It often costs less if the conditions are perfect. So going back to the program again, if the donor and the recipient are exactly aligned and there's no storage needed in the middle, it should be cheaper. Like the lights, for example, were stripped out well ahead of the project starting up, and then a certain amount of storage was factored into the cost, and it was still going to be cheaper. But then with COVID, the project timeline got pushed back, and then you've got this growing cost that you maybe can't control. So it would be really good to sort of disconnect the storage element from your project so that there's like mass storage. So you can almost treat it as off-the-shelf materials like you would with new, and then you'd have that kind of confidence you're going to get it at a particular point in time at a lower cost. But we're really not there yet.
I was going to just follow on from the point Nick made, which I think supports the point of a systemic change and a change in business models, because we can move away from this issue of disjointed timing of materials and products and the need at the end by having material suppliers taking back some of those materials and actually being a repository for sending those back out. And again, that's just a shift in business models, and that will only happen by specification and requiring that and seeing that. And we're starting to see product suppliers shift their models away from extraction and move much more towards taking back and sending back out. It's just a different mindset, I think, and hopefully we'd deal with that.
Those manufacturers really need to see they're not getting orders because they're not providing that service, then they'll move.
And perhaps for manufacturers in the future who don't do this, they've really got to look at their future business model and, will they become stranded companies of the future because there is no way to take back materials and store them for future use. So, Juliana?
Yeah, I'd just adding to that as well. I mean, we certainly found that it was cheaper to reuse furniture, but there are things that you need to be aware of, like that will work a little bit different when you're doing that than if you were ordering new furniture. For example, we couldn't have a confirmation of stock because our furniture contractor was sourcing the used furniture from other offices. So we couldn't really have a confirmation, okay, we will actually receive those until the end. There was situations where, one of them suddenly decided they were not going to get rid of their furniture anymore, which we were planning to purchase. So, one of the reasons why we ended up not with 70 but 66 is because we always had the plan B there at the background. The types of, for example, chairs that we were ordering, we had the backup plan for the new ones if we couldn't get them. So we sorted it out in the end, but some of them we had to purchase new because they were not available. So being aware of, and that's something that got the client a bit, they were concerned, but it's just it works a little bit different, so you have to accept that, and as long as you have your plan B there, to have the office ready when it needs to be ready.
Sure. Yeah. It's like a different procurement model, isn't it? People have got to learn to do procurement different. So, and with that, I'm going to open it up, and I'm sure there's people that have thought of questions. So, please come out with all your questions, even if they're really basic ones, like how's it going to happen? There we go. Oh.
Sorry, Claire Maud from the Crown Estate. I just wondered, what stage of the project did you set that benchmark? Because this is quite a new subject, like in the grand scheme of things, and without those benchmarks in place already, you're sort of starting from square zero. So were you some way through that project when you set 70% and realised that was potentially achievable, or Yeah.
So we said that right at the start. We agreed that with the client, the process we went through is right at the start of the project. We had workshops with the client. We had workshops with building users as well. And I guess to that, I think it's probably important to say in terms of perceptions, sometimes building users actually want that. And you don't even know because you didn't have this workshop with them to understand their views. So some of them even said to us, well, wouldn't it be nice to even they gave us some ideas, like if we did find some used furniture for somewhere else that had some interesting aspect to it, wouldn't it be nice to have a QR code so we could scan and see, oh, actually this chair was in the office as such, and which is really interesting. So we defined that percentage with the client right at the start, and then we put in place a process for them to help them achieve that target. It was endorsed from the client from the very start. It was one of the key targets for them, actually.
And again, those QR codes linked to a materials passport are really, really powerful going forward. If we can keep track of all these materials and where they're going. I think there's another question over here.
Hi, I'm Nicola Rutt from Studio Multi. In my previous role at Hawkins Brown Architects, I worked on Here East 10 years ago, and there was an aspiration to reuse some of the steels from the Olympic Stadium to create these kind of big meeting pods at Here East. And this was tier 1 contractor we were working with. The client was right behind it, and it couldn't happen because warranties. So my question is, 10 years on, how would that be different in terms of steel, warranties, and reusing an existing products?
I was going to say, Nick, hopefully you're going to answer. There's a few nodding heads as well. I think other people have.
It's one of the parts of the industry where there is an orthodox that's been created now. So there's a protocol from the Steel Construction Institute. So they've set out a sort of standard for how you reuse steel. And it's all about provenance. So your example there, you'd have no problem with that today because you'd be able to use the CE marking and the original structural spec from that building because you'd know what it was because it was only recently built. And then you can refabricate to suit whatever you need to do with it. It's almost exactly the same as new steel. It just won't look like new steel. That's the only difference, really. So there's a real clear orthodoxy there, and other bits of the industry need to catch up. So like raised floor as well has got quite a clear reuse pathway now. So if other areas of the industry sort of copied what they're doing, we'd have a lot more sort of rules that we can actually use to get this achieved.
Sure. Anna?
I was just going to say, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but he's amazing. Roy Fishwick from Cleveland Steel and Tubes. Amazing guy, happy to talk to you about anything to do with warranties, liability for reusing steel. Happy to share his details afterwards. You'll probably... I'll get in trouble for that.
You're allowed to say anything, don't worry.
But he's been working with a lot of the bigger developers here in London and outside to enable reuse of steel into a lot of big developments. So.
And I think that's a good point. I think what people need as well, we're looking at the BCO fit out guide for this, is lots of tips and hints of who to talk to, what websites to go and look at. Are there sort of websites like the, sort of eBay of bits of buildings that you can go and pick up materials on and learn more things, going forward.
The Cleveland Steel example is a really good one, but Roy's working with European Metal Recycling, and they're two separate companies, not linked in any way. Between them, they've got a larger stock holding, so then you're more likely to find the steel section that you need. So they're both working together to create a better market for the industry, and that's probably what other people need to copy. It's a completely different approach to sort of a capitalist market, really.
Yeah, and I know when I was at ISG, Pete Kelly was talking to Amazon Web Services to try and persuade them, who better than somebody like Amazon to set up a reuse site with their logistics and their storage facilities, but they weren't keen on the business model. It didn't make them enough money, but that's the sort of thing I feel that, we need. Anybody else got any comments or thoughts or just anything they want to share with everybody to make this work? There's a guy right up the back, so we'll... I think there's so much that needs to be done. Is the challenge going forward?
Thank you. Jeff Taylor, Alma Cancer. I used to be a small developer, and now I seem to be a medium-sized developer. But I just wonder if I could take the pin out of the hand grenade and ask the panel. We've been really talking about embodied carbon now, moving on to sort of carbon in use. Something I come up against all the time, developing and refurbishing listed buildings. The planning regime, etc., stops interdictions where you'd really like interdictions. Do you have any views, does the panel have any views as to what needs to change in town planning terms to sort of facilitate a refurbishment?
I think that's a question that comes up nearly every seminar I go to, but does anybody want to start with it? Or
Yeah. So the Utopia building for Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership ran into a very similar problem. So it's in a heritage area, and they recommended against changing the windows from Georgian bar sash windows to the single pane triple glazed windows that were needed for the Enofit passive house. And in the end, the council members who were on the committee voted the scheme in against the recommendation of the planning officers. So there's a bit of friction there between the direction we need to go in to facilitate this and maintaining things like heritage. But it's about having that argument and finding a middle ground that sort of suits everyone, really. So it's compromise.
And I think that's the thing we haven't brought out yet. It's about education as well. There's a lot of education around this and a lot of discussions I think that needs to be had, particularly with planning departments, because if we're going to get to zero carbon, ultimately there'll be no embodied carbon in any material. Everybody will be net zero carbon, scope 1 and 2 in operation. There will be no embodied carbon. But how we get there is the challenge, and everybody has to adjust and do something slightly different in the future. Anna, I think you look like you might have
I would just say, I agree. And I think to echo, it needs a discussion and education and finding a solution, because we can't keep operating as we are, and town planners need to find a way around it that supports historic buildings and aesthetics, but also deals with carbon. It's not an answer, I think.
Can I just add to that? Martin Smith here. I'm on the Museum of London relocation to Smithfield, and what we're doing is reusing all the sash windows, replacing them where necessary, filling them with low argon filled glass, completely refurbishing them, using all the existing timber that's reused from all the different sites. It's like a material deposit with stone and all the rest of it. So that's a good example of life cycle. However, it does cost significantly more. Even on commercial schemes, raised access floors, reused, that costs more than new now, or if not matching. And that's even if you can even get them because of the demand for carbon saving. So I think all of this needs to look in the round. But what I'm trying to say is, for the listed building question, before austerity, the government used to give, I think, if you were on a listed building and refurbishing it, it used to give you a VAT incentive to do it, as well as in Wales, and that has gone. So I think the whole economic model around this needs to change. And if we think about the government, silence. But even Greenpeace took them to court this year and said, look, you're not keeping your zero carbon commitments because of what you've done so far, and you can't reach it. And they won it in the High Court, Greenpeace. So and we work in construction, which is worked on low margins, and quite frankly, on low profit margins, unless regulations there, we can talk about life cycle carbon, and some of the elite developers and high-end funds will get it, but ultimately it's not going to bring about the amount of change required when you've got 80% of those buildings there in 2050. So that's some musings. It's not really a question, but I was just telling you.
No, it's really interesting though, and I think you've hit on a few points there. Government and legislation is always going to push things forward quicker. But I think over the years I've been trying to get net zero legislation. I sort of feel like we also have to come up with our own solutions. For net zero carbon offices now, we've brought neighbours into the UK through the Better Building Partnership when I was on the board of that, and at least that's now a solution that is quick and easy for everybody, and hopefully will be part of the net zero carbon standard going forward. But that we've got to also find some solutions. But also, if the cost of carbon goes up, so if in order to get planning or any kind of council approvals, you have to pay a higher cost of carbon, the cost of your materials will change, proportionally. So I think there is an economic model which will eventually come in. And if you, in order to get planning, have to pay a huge cost for new materials, you're going to look to reuse. If the reuse has more value, then more companies are going to set up doing the storage, but there are also going to be more sort of exchange sites and stuff. That's my optimistic view anyway for Tuesday morning. Anybody want to add anything to
I
the
was just going to say,
listed
you mentioned raised access flooring being, reuse raised access flooring being more expensive, but in the study we did, we found that there's suppliers who can be 80% cheaper than new suppliers. So it'd be interesting to hear your experiences separately.
It's almost like there needs to be somewhere we can all share these experiences, like everybody wants to do this. How do we get everybody in a forum? I think this is partly why the BCO wanted to do the research, not just to have another piece of paper that said it's a guide on circular economy, but to start these debates, how do we make it work?
This collaboration and see okay, if you achieve success in that specific element of circular economy, how have you gone about it?
Yeah.
How shall I go about it? And then,
Lots of case studies, I think. What worked for you, what happened well, yeah.
So structural change is the key. And changing our outlook as an industry. We're all very insular about what we're doing well, and we need to make sure everyone learns the lessons, because you learn a lot more from things going wrong than things going right. And the Utopia building is built to be a lesson to the industry. So that's what everyone else should be copying, I think.
I really like the Utopia building. I think it was an embargo on talking when I was at ISG, because I don't work for them anymore. I can talk about it and get sued by somebody else. But, it's passive house. It is net zero. It's one of the only buildings I know that's been refurbished to a net zero, 55 kilowatt hours per metre squared. We will see in operation, it's being heavily monitored as well, but it also embodied circular economy, and it had a really high social value target. So it cost-wise was a challenge, I think, because of COVID and delayed programmes. But it was one of the good case studies. But I know there are others as well outside the UK.
Yeah, I was going to say, hopefully, with this research project, I actually said to the BCO, I think there's more than enough already out there. There's lots of, UKGBC, LETI, they've all set, guidance that's out there. But I think what we've tried to do is to bring that together and signpost out and ensure that what is out there is signposted to, and we continually update, like the Circular Buildings Toolkit, freely available, got case studies, got KPIs, metrics. It's just... using it.
No, I think it's good, and we're going to make sure we reference it in the fit-out guide, so the BCO sort of talks with one voice in all this. So I'm conscious I was asked to finish at 10 o'clock on time. So my last question for the panel, and I'll look at faces, see what's is what is the one thing that you would do tomorrow, you would have happen tomorrow, that would help circular economy advance? It could be somebody doing something, or it doesn't have to be realistic, but what one thing do you think would help push the circular economy forward? Anybody want to go first?
Can I legislate that no more materials will be extracted out of the ground?
Yeah, it's fine. You can anything you want. I think it's really good. It's like legislating that we have to stop using coal and oil tomorrow.
I'd say probably change how you view materials. Every material, everything has value, is an asset, rather than something that you can just strip out and throw away. Change our views of materials, basically.
I'd have free, unlimited storage available across the country with expertise in those buildings as to what the materials are and how they perform.
Yeah, no, that's a good one as well. So I hope you've enjoyed the discussion today. Please come and mingle afterwards. But I did promise I would wrap up, and if my watch is not too far out, I think I'm nearly on time. But hope you enjoyed the debate, and thank you all very much for coming. And hopefully see you at another BCO event. And thanks to Kate and Anna for hosting us.